They laughed when she pulled out her grandfather's compass during navigation training. They laughed harder when she refused to use the GPS like everyone else. But nobody was laughing 3 months later when that same brass compass led 12 Navy SEALs out of a mountain ambush that satellite systems couldn't solve. Before we dive into how Corporal Maya Reeves became the most unlikely hero in SEAL Team reconnaissance history, drop a comment below telling us what city or country you're watching this from. Seriously, we love seeing where our community spans across the globe. Maya Reeves grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains weren't just scenery but a second home. Her grandfather, Samuel Reeves, was a Marine Corps navigator in Vietnam who taught her to read terrain before she could read chapter books. Every weekend, he'd take her hiking with nothing but a topographic map, that old brass compass, and his stories about how technology fails but true north never lies. When he passed away from lung cancer when Maya was 16, she inherited 2 things: his compass and his belief that the best soldiers trust their instincts more than their instruments. Her mother wanted her to go to college, maybe become a teacher or a nurse, something safe and respectable, but Maya felt that compass pulling her elsewhere. At 18, she walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office in downtown Asheville and signed her name on a contract that would change her life forever. Boot camp at Parris Island was exactly as brutal as promised. Maya wasn't the strongest recruit, nor the fastest, but she had something unusual, an almost supernatural sense of direction. While other recruits struggled with land navigation exercises, stumbling through forests with expensive equipment, Maya would simply close her eyes, feel the wind, check the sun's position, and move with confidence. Her drill instructors noticed. They called her Compass Girl, at first, mockingly, then with a hint of respect when she never got lost, never led her fire team astray, never hesitated at a crossroads. After infantry training, Maya qualified as a reconnaissance Marine and was assigned to a specialized unit that worked closely with Navy SEAL teams on joint operations. This is where her real story begins, where the laughter started, and where it would eventually die in the throats of men who underestimated her. The integration program was what they called it officially. Unofficially, it was a test to see if Marines could keep up with SEALs during mountain reconnaissance operations in the Hindu Kush region. Maya was one of 3 Marines selected, the only woman, and definitely the youngest at 23 years old. The SEAL team she was attached to, Team 7, had a reputation for being the best and knowing it. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Jack Sutherland, was a 12-year veteran with 3 Bronze Stars and an ego that could fill a hangar. He looked at Maya on day 1 of joint training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and his face said everything his mouth was too professional to speak. A woman, a kid, a Marine, not even a SEAL. This was going to be a disaster. Training started in the Chattahoochee National Forest, a landscape of dense woods, steep ridges, and terrain that could break equipment as easily as it broke spirits. The exercise was simple on paper. Navigate 15 miles through unmapped forest, locate 3 hidden caches, and reach the extraction point within 8 hours. Every team had the latest GPS units, encrypted tablets with real-time satellite imagery, and communication equipment that could call in coordinates to the millimeter. Maya had all that too, but she also had her grandfather's compass hanging from a cord around her neck. When the other SEALs saw it during gear check, the comments started immediately. "What is this, the Civil War?" One of them, a stocky operator named Rodriguez, joked, while others chuckled. "Does it come with a musket?" Another added. Lieutenant Commander Sutherland didn't laugh, but he didn't defend her either. He just looked at the compass, then at Maya, and said coldly, "Don't slow us down with sentimental garbage, Corporal." Maya didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that proving yourself to men like this required silence and results, not words. The mission began at dawn, teams spreading out into the forest like ghosts. Maya's team moved fast, Sutherland setting a punishing pace that had everyone breathing hard within the first hour. The GPS guided them efficiently through the first checkpoint, and they recovered the cache without incident. 2 down, 1 to go. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, moving into a valley system that satellite imagery showed as straightforward, something felt wrong to Maya. The air pressure had changed. The wind patterns were strange. Birds that should have been calling in the canopy had gone silent. She'd felt this before in the mountains back home, right before sudden weather systems rolled in and turned navigation into a nightmare. She tried to voice her concern. "Sir, I think we should consider an alternate route." "The weather patterns?" Sutherland cut her off without even turning around. The GPS says straight ahead, Corporal. We're not navigating by feelings and hunches. Keep moving. The team continued forward. 20 minutes later, the storm hit. Not a gradual buildup, but a sudden, violent mountain squall that turned the forest into a wall of rain and wind. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. The GPS units, which relied on clear satellite signals, started glitching. Error messages, lost connections, recalculating routes that made no sense. Sutherland called a halt, frustration evident in every tense line of his body as he tried to reboot his equipment. Other team members did the same, huddling under their ponchos, cursing at screens that kept freezing or showing their position as nowhere near where they actually were. The technology they'd relied on absolutely had failed them in the one moment they needed it most. Maya pulled out her compass. The brass caught what little light filtered through the storm, and she oriented herself carefully, cross-referencing with the topographic map she'd studied that morning, now protected in a waterproof case. She could feel the terrain under her boots, the slight decline that indicated water flow, the way the wind moved around the ridge they were near. She'd done this hundreds of times with her grandfather, in rain and snow and fog, learning to trust the fundamentals when everything else failed. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, her voice calm and clear despite the chaos, "I know where we are, and I know how to get us to the final cache and extraction point." Sutherland looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. "You know? Based on what, that antique?" He gestured dismissively at her compass. "Our $1 million equipment is down, and you think a piece of brass is going to save us?" Maya met his eyes steadily. "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I think. This compass has true north. The terrain hasn't changed. The extraction point is still in the same location. Technology fails. Geography doesn't." The other SEALs were watching now, some with skepticism, others with curiosity. Rodriguez, the one who'd mocked her earlier, was studying his dead GPS with frustration written all over his face. Sutherland had a choice to make, and everyone knew it. Trust the equipment and wait out the storm, potentially missing their time window and failing the exercise, or trust the Marine with the old compass and risk looking like a fool if she was wrong. Pride and practicality warred on his face. Finally, through gritted teeth, he said, "Fine, lead the way, Corporal, but if you get us lost, you'll be scrubbing latrines until retirement." Maya took point, something that never happened to the junior member of a SEAL team, especially not during training. She moved carefully but confidently, using the compass to maintain bearing, reading the landscape like her grandfather had taught her. Every 100 meters she'd stop, reassess, cross-reference with the map, and adjust. The storm continued to rage, but she navigated through it as if she could see through the rain. She led them down a ridgeline that no GPS had suggested, through a creek bed that provided natural cover and easier movement, and around a boulder field that would have slowed them down significantly. The other operators followed in silence, their skepticism gradually transforming into something else. Respect, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. 2 hours after the storm hit, Maya led the team directly to the third cache, hidden in a fallen tree that she'd identified from map contours and terrain features. The SEALs stared at the cache, then at her, with expressions that ranged from impressed to stunned. Sutherland said nothing, but he gave a curt nod that might have been acknowledgement. They recovered the cache, and Maya continued navigating, bringing them to the extraction point with 40 minutes to spare before the deadline. As they waited for the helicopter, the storm finally breaking up to reveal patches of blue sky, Rodriguez approached Maya. "That was incredible, Corporal," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone navigate like that in those conditions." Others echoed similar sentiments. Even Sutherland, though he remained distant, looked at her differently now. The compass around her neck wasn't a joke anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes the old ways, the fundamental skills, mattered more than any technology. But this training exercise was just the beginning. The real test came 4 months later when Maya's integrated team deployed to the mountains of eastern Afghanistan on a reconnaissance mission that would become classified for years afterward. The objective was to locate and observe a high-value target believed to be coordinating attacks from a compound deep in the Tora Bora region. Intelligence suggested the target moved locations frequently, using the complex cave systems and mountain passes to evade drone surveillance. Team 7, with Maya attached, was inserted at night via helicopter into a landing zone that was barely a flat piece of rock on a mountainside. The plan was to move under cover of darkness to an observation position, gather intelligence for 72 hours, and extract without ever being detected. Clean, simple, professional. Except that nothing in war ever stays clean or simple for long. The team moved through the mountains like shadows, Maya navigating with a combination of GPS, which was working perfectly in the clear mountain air, and her constant awareness of the terrain. They reached their observation position by dawn and settled in, watching the compound below through high-powered optics. For 2 days, everything went according to plan. They observed movement, counted personnel, mapped the compound's defenses, and sent encrypted reports back to headquarters. Maya pulled her weight, taking her turn on watch, maintaining discipline, becoming just another member of the team despite the initial doubts. On the third night, everything went wrong. A shepherd, who shouldn't have been in that area according to intelligence reports, wandered too close to their position with his small flock of goats. The team held perfectly still, hoping he'd pass by without noticing, but one of the goats, curious or spooked by some scent, came right up to their camouflage position and started bleating loudly. The shepherd investigated, saw armed soldiers, and ran. Within minutes, the compound below came alive with activity. Lights, vehicles, armed men spreading out in a search pattern. The team's position was compromised, and they needed to extract immediately before being surrounded. Sutherland called for emergency extraction, but the response from headquarters was devastating. A massive dust storm was forming between their location and the nearest friendly base. Helicopter extraction was impossible for at least 6 to 8 hours, maybe longer. They were on their own, with enemy fighters who knew these mountains far better than they did, already beginning to sweep toward their position. The team had 2 choices: hold their position and hope to remain hidden until extraction was possible, which seemed unlikely given how many fighters were now searching for them, or move to an alternate extraction point that might be accessible despite the storm. The problem was that the alternate extraction point was 12 kilometers away, through mountain terrain that intelligence had marked as poorly mapped and potentially filled with cave complexes where enemy fighters could be hiding. Sutherland gathered the team for a quick tactical discussion, voices low and urgent. "We can't stay here. They're moving right toward us. We need to reach Echo Point," he said, referencing the alternate extraction location on their maps. "GPS routing shows 3 possible approaches, but all of them take us through areas we haven't scouted." He pulled up his tablet, but even in the clear night air, something was wrong. The topographic data was glitching, showing contour lines that seemed to conflict with what they could see around them. Someone back at headquarters had uploaded corrupted map data, or the region had been surveyed poorly in the first place. Either way, they couldn't trust the digital navigation completely. Rodriguez voiced what everyone was thinking. "Sir, if we choose the wrong route and get pinned down in a canyon or dead-end valley, we're done. We need to be absolutely certain about the path." All eyes turned to Maya. She pulled out her compass, along with the physical topographic map she always carried as backup, and studied it using a red-filtered flashlight. She'd spent weeks studying the terrain of this region before deployment, memorizing key features and landmarks the way her grandfather had taught her. She compared what she saw on the map with what she'd observed during their infiltration and the past 2 days of surveillance. "Lieutenant Commander," she said quietly but firmly, "none of the GPS routes are optimal. They all funnel us through high-risk areas. But there's a route here," she traced a line on her physical map, "that follows a ridge system the digital maps are rendering incorrectly. It's longer by about 2 kilometers, but it keeps us on high ground, gives us visibility, and avoids the most likely ambush points. I can navigate it with the compass and terrain features." Sutherland looked at the map, then at his glitching GPS, then back at Maya. The rest of the team waited in tense silence. Enemy voices could be heard in the distance now, getting closer. There was no time for debate or second-guessing. "You got us out of that storm in Georgia," Sutherland said, and for the first time Maya heard respect in his voice rather than grudging acceptance. "You've earned my trust, Corporal. Take point. Get us to Echo Point alive." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of 12 lives suddenly resting on her shoulders, on her grandfather's compass, and on every lesson she'd ever learned in the mountains of North Carolina. They moved out immediately, Maya leading with Sutherland right behind her, the team in tactical formation. The terrain was treacherous, loose rock and steep grades that required careful footing even with night vision equipment. Maya navigated by compass bearing, constantly cross-referencing with terrain features she could identify. A distinctively shaped peak to the east, a valley system that should be on their right, a dry riverbed that the map indicated as a key landmark. Behind them, they could hear the enemy search expanding, voices calling out in Pashto, beams of flashlights sweeping the darkness. The team moved as quickly as silence allowed, trusting Maya's navigation completely now, because they had no other choice. An hour into the movement, they heard vehicles on the valley floor below, headlights cutting through the darkness. The enemy was using trucks to cover ground faster, trying to cut off potential escape routes. Maya adjusted their path slightly, taking them higher up the ridge to stay out of sight lines, even though it made the climbing harder. 2 hours in, one of the SEALs, a younger operator named Chen, lost his footing and slid several meters down loose scree before catching himself. The noise seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. Everyone froze, weapons ready, scanning for threats. Voices shouted from below, closer than comfortable. Someone had heard. Maya quickly assessed their position and made a decision. "There's a cut in the ridge about 200 meters ahead," she whispered to Sutherland. "We can drop down behind it, move through a boulder field that will mask our thermal signature, and come out on the far side of that peak. It'll buy us separation." Sutherland didn't question her. "Move." They reached the cut just as flashlight beams began probing the ridge where they'd been moments before. The boulder field was exhausting to navigate, essentially climbing over and between massive rocks in full gear, but it did exactly what Maya had predicted. The enemy searchlights swept past their position without detecting them, thermal imaging scattered by the cold rocks. They emerged on the far side and continued moving. 3 hours into the movement, the physical toll was showing on everyone. The altitude, the weight of gear, the stress, the difficult terrain, it was grinding them down. But Maya kept them moving, kept them on course, her compass steady in her hand, even when exhaustion made everything else shake. She thought about her grandfather, imagined him walking beside her through these mountains, reminding her that navigation wasn't just about reaching a destination, but about bringing everyone home safely. 4 hours in, they finally saw it. Echo Point, a relatively flat area on a mountain saddle that was marked on all their maps as the alternate extraction site. But they also saw something else. Headlights moving toward the same location from a different approach. The enemy had guessed their destination and was racing to cut them off. Sutherland cursed under his breath. They were still almost a kilometer away from Echo Point, and the vehicles would reach it before they could. Worse, dawn was approaching, which would eliminate their night vision advantage and make them easier to spot. They were running out of time and options. Maya studied the terrain one more time, and then she saw it. A steep gully system that her map showed as potentially passable, but that the digital maps had marked as too dangerous. It was almost vertical in places, would require leaving behind some non-essential gear, but it would cut their travel time in half and bring them to Echo Point from an unexpected direction. "Sir," she said urgently, "there's one more option. It's risky, but it's our best shot." She showed him the route on her map. Sutherland looked at the gully, visible now in the pre-dawn light, and saw immediately how dangerous it was. But he also saw the headlights converging on Echo Point and knew they had no good choices left. "Everyone drop non-essential gear. Keep weapons, ammo, comms, and medical. We're going to slide down hell itself." He looked at Maya. "Lead us through, Corporal." The descent through the gully was controlled chaos. Part climbing, part sliding, all dangerous. Maya went first, finding handholds and footholds, calling out warnings about loose rock, guiding each team member through the most treacherous sections. Her compass was useless here. This was pure terrain reading and mountain sense. Twice, sections of the gully threatened to collapse entirely, sending showers of rocks tumbling into the darkness below. Once, Rodriguez slipped and would have fallen to serious injury if Chen hadn't caught his gear strap at the last second. But Maya kept them moving, kept them together, and 30 agonizing minutes later, they emerged at the bottom of the gully, scratched and bruised but intact, and only 300 meters from Echo Point. The enemy vehicles had reached the point from the main approach, and armed fighters were spreading out, clearly expecting the American team to arrive from the direction of their last known position. They weren't watching the gully that their own maps probably told them was impassable. Sutherland made the call to headquarters on encrypted comms. "Echo 6 to base, we are at Echo Point. Request immediate extraction. We have enemy presence at the LZ. The response came back quickly. "Echo 6, Dust storm is clearing faster than expected. Bird is inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Hold position. 12 minutes might as well have been 12 hours. The enemy fighters were spreading out, and it was only a matter of time before they checked every possible approach, including the gully. The team set up a defensive perimeter in the rocks near Echo Point, weapons trained on likely threat approaches. Maya took a position next to Sutherland, both of them watching the sky to the south where their rescue would come from, and the terrain around them where death might come from at any moment. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. 5 minutes in, one of the enemy fighters started moving toward their position, rifle slung over his shoulder, smoking a cigarette, casual. He was maybe 50 meters away. The team held their fire. One shot would give away their position to everyone. They stayed absolutely still, barely breathing, as the fighter wandered closer. 30 meters, 20 meters. Maya could see the ember of his cigarette glowing in the dim pre-dawn light. 15 meters. Then miraculously, another fighter called out to him from the vehicles, and he turned and walked back, never knowing how close he'd come to death. 8 minutes in, they heard it, the distant thump of helicopter rotors, coming fast and low. The enemy heard it too, and suddenly the entire area erupted with activity. Fighters running back to their vehicles, weapons being grabbed, spotlights searching the sky. The helicopter, a Black Hawk with door gunners, came in fast over the ridge, and the pilot's voice crackled over comms. Echo 6, mark your position. We are taking fire. Sutherland threw a green smoke grenade and the helicopter banked hard toward them. The next 60 seconds were pure chaos. The helicopter touched down just long enough for the team to sprint aboard. Enemy rounds starting to crack through the air. Door gunners returning fire with heavy machine guns. The pilot pulling up and away at maximum power while everyone was still piling in. Maya was the last one aboard. Sutherland literally pulling her into the helicopter as it lifted off, rounds sparking off the helicopter's armored belly. Then they were up and away, the mountain falling below them, the enemy fighters becoming tiny figures in the growing daylight. The team collapsed in the helicopter exhausted, bleeding from a dozen minor cuts and scrapes, but alive. All 12 of them. Alive. Back at the forward operating base, after debriefing and medical checks, Sutherland found Maya sitting alone on some supply crates, her grandfather's compass in her hands. He walked over and stood there for a moment before speaking. That navigation through the gully system wasn't on any map, digital or otherwise. You read that terrain purely by instinct and experience. Maya looked up at him, too tired to be diplomatic. My grandfather taught me that maps show you where things are. Experience teaches you how to get there alive. Sutherland nodded slowly. I owe you an apology, Corporal. When you first joined this team, I saw your age, your rank, your gender, and I made assumptions. I was wrong. You didn't just keep up with SEALs today. You led us. You saved 12 lives with a brass compass and skills that most operators have forgotten even exist. He extended his hand. It's an honor to serve with you. Maya shook his hand, and for the first time since joining this team, she felt truly accepted not as a Marine attached to SEALs, not as a woman in a male unit, but simply as a soldier who'd proven her worth in the only way that mattered. The story of that mission spread quietly through special operations communities, the way these stories do. The Marine with the compass who'd navigated a SEAL team through enemy territory when all the high-tech equipment had failed or become irrelevant. Maya Reeves became something of a legend, though she never sought the attention. She continued deploying with SEAL teams, eventually earning her own call sign, True North. She trained new operators in fundamental land navigation, teaching them that technology was a tool, but terrain sense was a skill. She kept her grandfather's compass with her on every mission, a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools, guided by human intelligence and experience, were more reliable than any satellite or computer. Years later, when she was promoted to gunnery sergeant and eventually became one of the first female Marine raiders, she would still pull out that brass compass during navigation courses and tell the story of the night she led 12 Navy SEALs out of the mountains of Afghanistan. Not to brag, but to teach a lesson that her grandfather had taught her and that she'd proven in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. That courage, competence, and humility matter more than equipment. That being underestimated is an opportunity, not an insult, and that True North isn't just a direction on a compass. It's a principle for how to live and lead. If you believe that real strength comes from mastering the fundamentals and never giving up on what you know to be true, comment compass below and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.